other people around them better. Let me tell you, so this is the first student that she was one of the students who got into Princeton, Yale, MIT. She is now working as a strategic investments analyst at JP Morgan and Chase. And you can see, this was back from 2012. She just, guess what? I got all this great news. And she was the student who was one of the two students who got into these top schools. And so what she had done, she had grown up in China. She came here to the US for high school. And when she was in China, her experience of growing up and working with special needs kids, that was one of her passions. Was she noticed in her, where she was growing up in Shanghai, that it was students with special needs were kind of pushed aside. It was sort of embarrassing to have them out in public, and so they were kind of hidden behind closed doors. When she got to the US and came to get part of her high school, she found that they had a Best Buddies program. Now, Best Buddies is a program that pairs students with special needs with high school students to help integrate them into the community, make them feel welcomed, and help them get the resources that they might need. And she was so passionate about this that she thought, oh, this is what we need over in Shanghai. Let me create this. So she reached out to the woman that she had been working with, and the woman sort of dismissed her and was like, well, yeah, good idea. But she didn't really think she was going to do anything about it. So Dian went ahead and she created she did all the translating, she did all the legwork to make it happen. And she created the first chapter of Best Buddies in Shanghai. I might have been the first one in China. And then of course she told that story. Now, she was also a very high achieving student. She had amazing grades. She had gotten her English to such a strong point that she was one of the lead debate participants on her team. And she had some other amazing stories, but she was the student who really taught me, oh, this is what I need to teach students. So I love to share that story because she was really the catalyst for what I learned. I love Brianna's story. So Brianna was a student I worked with, I think it was back in 2016 or 2017. And she had a 3.6 GPA. She was one of three co-captains of her soccer team. And she came to me not really sure how she could stand out. Now, at this point, I had created the Dream School project, and I was helping students, mentoring them, helping them find their stories, find the way that they could stand out and what they wanted to create in the world. So I think we started working together maybe halfway through her junior year. And one of the things we did was we created that last summer before she was going to write her applications. And she ended up getting, I think it was an internship at it was not an orphanage, that's another student. It was a organization in, I think, Beijing, that worked with students who are actually adults who had special needs. So have a little bit of a theme here, but we've got many different stories not connected necessarily to that population. But it was something she became very passionate about. She was also really wanting to go in as pre-med. And so she wanted to know how to stand out. So one of the things we did was we created a way for her to work with these adults that she was so passionate about helping, and to bring a higher level of creativity and innovation to the work there. She could have just shown up and kind of checked off the boxes of what people asked her to do and sort of taken a passive role, but she took a very active role in seeing what she could create and how she could make the lives of these adults so much better and enriched. And she came home just completely excited and alive and so thrilled about what she had been able to create. So we ended up writing these beautiful essays, and she ended up getting into NYU, which for her was definitely a reach school, right? With a 3.6, you're not going to just automatically get into NYU. That's more the average at NYU, I believe, is more like a 3.8 of the students accepted there. So and I just was in touch with her recently, and I asked her how she was doing, and she said, I finished NYU and now I'm gearing up for medical school. But of course, COVID slowed things down for her, so she was just figuring out what she wanted to do with that. But I love that story because We think of, reach schools, as like impossible to get into if you don't have the quote right GPA, right? She didn't have the right GPA, but she had a beautiful story. And what we did in her essays is we helped make the connection between the work she had done that summer and how it was going to inform her as a doctor and as someone who was really passionate about working with kids and adults with special needs and particular learning challenges. So it created this beautiful unified story for her, which is one of the reasons why she was able to override her lower GPA and really stand out. Let's get another one for you. There you go. Okay, so William, this is William's story. So I just had him come on to a college panel with me with some of my previous students from the past several years. He was part of that panel, and it was really, really cool to see him talk about how the work we did together. We started working in 2017, and he was halfway through his junior year. He had a lower GPA because he had also come from China and was doing school here in the US, but his first year especially his English was very poor, and so he struggled, of course, academically to try to get those scores up while still learning English and becoming more fluent. So he didn't fully recover from that, that first year of struggling so much. His GPA didn't fully recover, but so imagine if you're coming to, working with someone who's in the middle of junior year, they're already pretty set in stone, right? So he was very busy. He didn't have a lot of room to create anything brand new, right? So with Brianna's story, we got to go create something new with her summer, which was really exciting. We also did some really cool work with her around the soccer team as well. So we used everything she was already doing as a place to showcase and demonstrate and grow her creativity and innovation. William said, okay, I don't really have a lot of room to create anything new. So what can we do? And I said, no problem. Let's work with what you're already doing. So he was really passionate about mathematics, and even as a junior in high school, he knew that he wanted to become a mathematics professor. So I said to him, well, tell me about what you're involved in at your school. And he was involved, of course, with his math team. Excuse me for a moment. And I asked him what the team was like, and he said, well, it's sort of, there's three different groups of kids. There's one group of kids who show up and they compete every week. There's another group of kids that they compete, sometimes, and then there's another group of kids that shows up just once a week for something to do. And there's not really any unity among those different groups. And I think the work we're doing is kind of boring. We just do worksheets. So he decided he wanted to sort of change things up. He wanted to create more team spirit, more connection among his peers on the team, and also create just a very different experience. Instead of just going and doing worksheets sort of silently, he was going to create a new lecture series that was interactive and much more team bonding. And that's exactly what he did. He ended up becoming the captain of his debate team, and but really it was less about him becoming captain. It was more about how he was able to see himself as a leader and make a change around him, because he noticed there was a need, and that's what he addressed. He ended up getting into Carnegie Mellon, which was definitely a reach school for him. His roommate got into Carnegie Mellon and had a much higher GPA than his. Now, of course, I didn't know that student. I didn't see his essays or resume or anything. So we don't know exactly what was happening there, but it's interesting to note that a student who had a higher GPA didn't get in while William did. Yeah. And a lot of that is because of his story. It's all because of his story. Now, here's something really interesting to note. Um, William got so clear about why pure mathematics that when he got in, he ended up actually not going to Carnegie Mellon. He ended up going to Imperial School, London School of Economics, because they felt like that was a really even better fit for him. And when he got there, he was amazed to see that there were so many students who they were in pure mathematics, but not really for any particular reason, just because maybe they were good at it or didn't know what else to choose. But he was so clear about his why, because we got to really dig into the why with his essays. And he told me just a couple weeks ago that he so what he did was he went through his undergrad in 3 years because he had so much clarity. He did his graduate degree in a year, and he's now applying to his PhD program. And he said, you know what, I'm using some of the writing for my PhD application that we did 4 years ago, or whatever it was, 5 years ago. And and he's using some of that writing now. So that tells you just how important creating that story is, not just for admissions, but for how a student can move all the way through college and beyond. So I really love to share that story, and it's fun to get the update from him as well. This is also an interesting story. So Bayne was in my first round of the Dream School Project mentoring program. And at that point, I think it was like just a 6 or 8 week program. So, and I realized, oh, that's too short. We're just planting seeds. I need to be around to help those seeds grow. But Bayne had an incredible story from that first program. So she had severe dyslexia, and so her grades were really rough. She had a C average. She got a 900 on the SAT, which, that's it almost takes trying to do that in some ways for some students, right? But for her, it was such a struggle. What she got clear about as we talked and we were going through all of this, ideation of what do you want to create, she got really clear about the kind of impact she wanted to make for students who might want to go into law enforcement. She had gotten into a law enforcement program and gotten really passionate about it, and it was the first time she really felt alive and empowered. And then, so she thought, well, why don't I grow this? And then it ended up morphing and changing into more of a mentoring entrepreneurship kind of program. But she went and pitched it to Wharton, and she was accepted as the only teenage student who pitched her idea to Wharton. She ended up getting into, I'm forgetting right now where I think it was University of Miami, and which was definitely a reach school for her with her C average and 900 SAT. But she really took this idea of just running with it. So she's just graduated. She's still working on this program, still thinking along. She majored in social entrepreneurship, and I just love this story because it tells us again. So it's not like we're talking about getting into Harvard necessarily, but it's absolutely was Harvard for her to get into the University of Miami. So we're seeing that some of these stories about students who aren't necessarily the quote ideal student, right? Moving beyond that because they have a real story. They've created a real story. Let's get my cursor to work here. Okay. Albert is another interesting story. So Albert was a very strong student. In some ways, he had gotten a perfect ACT score, but he had this lower GPA, 3.7. That can sometimes be a red flag for colleges because they're thinking, wait, how come this student is so gifted academically that he can just get a perfect score the first try, which is I think what happened with him. But the GPA is lower. What's missing? How come this student doesn't have motivation? It doesn't have the drive to live up to his full potential? So he again started working with me beginning of junior year, and he was sure that nothing was interesting to him. So we would come together, we'd brainstorm, we'd try things out. He'd go try it for a week and he'd come back and say, oh, it's not it. I tried it, it's not interesting. And he told me, I've tried everything. I just, nothing's interesting. But I hung in there. And then one day after a few months of working together, he said to me kind of out of the corner of his mouth, I think I like to cook. And I said, what? Oh, great. And now he was up in the Boston area. So I connected him with a chef who was in that area. He started taking cooking lessons. He would go to the farmer's market and talk to the vendors. He got really interested in the farm to table movement, ended up going and visiting a farm in his town that was nearby that had a restaurant. So farm to table restaurant, and forming a relationship there, asking a lot of questions, ended up getting a job at a 4-star restaurant in his town. And meanwhile, was cooking a lot for his family and friends. So, this was great. Now, one of the things that we had sort of thought about what would be possible to do with his interest in cooking, what could it be, like a culinary arts festival at his school or something like that. and never, he didn't, that didn't quite resonate with him, so he was very introverted, he didn't want to do anything huge like that. So we just kept it smaller, and focused on how he could impact his family and friends, and really educate himself about this farm to table movement and the local food movement. And but he was also going into college pre-med, same as Brianna, but he didn't have any traditional research. And he was very worried about that. He said, this is not enough. I'm not going to stand out. And basically what ended up happening was I said to him, I promise it's enough. Just make sure that you tell everyone, tell the admissions officers how cooking for your family and friends is going to make you an amazing physician. So he did that. And he ended up getting into UCLA. I think he's now he just finished his third year, actually. So he's going to be entering senior year really soon. And he's thriving there, right? So what we're learning from these stories is that it's not about the perfection of your scores. It's about your story, about waking up to what's interesting to you. Now, I have plenty of students who have really strong grades and test scores, who've also created projects, who've gotten into amazing schools, but those their stories are a little more straightforward, right? So I'm sharing the stories with you tonight that are less straightforward and maybe more hopeful as well. Let's see what our oh, this is a beautiful story too. So Jolie, she just got, this past December, got into Pitzer College, which is in California. It's her dream school. We started working together, I think halfway through junior year again, and we were working to get her create a project. And it might have even been at the beginning of junior year that we started, I think it was. But then COVID hit, right? And she never really got a big project off the ground. She's an amazing artist, a social justice activist, just a really amazing, active young woman in her school and in her community. But she didn't have any one particular project. So she was like, oh, how am I going to do with this, right? So what she ended up doing is we just did deep research into her applications and her schools. We talked for hours and hours and hours. And she, when in this, I'll send this interview after tomorrow, when I send the replay, I'll send this interview to you, because it's such a beautiful example of how she made the admissions process work for her. She didn't, I think she had a 3.7, 3.75 GPA. Her school didn't really do GPA, so we were always trying to figure out kind of ballpark where she was. But you know, she was like an A-B student, right? Not straight A, certainly not struggling, but it wasn't straightforward. She had overcome some major challenges with ADHD, kind of had a major turnaround. I think it was in sophomore year, end of sophomore year, and it completely changed everything for her. So a lot of what we did was talked about that transformation, and she's just so lit up. But we also did very deep research. This is just something to file away for students who are thinking about admissions down the road, something to file away. We did very deep research into the colleges to find out what was really the right fit for her, and she absolutely fell in love with Pitzer. And she ended up forming a relationship with the college admissions rep for her region from Pitzer. And we wrote this beautiful supplemental essay. The question was something like, if you could create, you know, a special event at Pitzer, what would it be and why? And so we wrote this beautiful, she wanted to create an event for showcasing people of color and their art and their creation and their contribution in the world, and wanted to do a big gala and create mental health awareness, use it as an opportunity to create mental health awareness. And she showed the story to the admissions rep, and he said, beautiful, now just tell me why Pitzer, include a little bit of that. Now, even though that wasn't in the question, that was really helpful for us both to realize that they wanted to know, okay, why, yes, this is what you're going to create, but why specifically at Pitzer? So we went and did 3 or 4 hours of research more to go to find out why, how do we explain this? We only ended up adding maybe 3 sentences to the essay, but she already had a strong personal statement, and now she had an even stronger supplemental essay. And when she got her results, she was just so thrilled. Her family was so thrilled, because her family was concerned, is she gonna do okay? Her sister, I supported her, for several years before she did her admissions. Her sister got into Tufts, and so but she had higher grades and test scores than Jolie did, and so her parents and Jolie were concerned, but she ended up absolutely standing out. So I tell that story just to say that sometimes, especially if you're here and you've got a student who's a rising senior, to say that amazing research into your colleges and really falling in love with a school and helping them fall in love with you back is part of this as well.